Let's now dig in a little bit deeper into the concept of project scope definition. So remember that the scope of the project is essentially the work that has to be done in order to deliver the product, service, or result that the project it was created for. However, a project scope statement should also set the right boundaries by clarifying what the project includes or what the project excludes. A well-defined project scope statement should include the following elements. First of all, it should specify what the project objectives are. Now, a project objective should satisfy the SMART requirements, meaning that it is specific, measurable, attainable or agreed, realistic and relevant, and time-bound. A project scope statement should also clarify what the key deliverables of the project are and when should those deliverables be achieved, and that is why we need to specify the schedule milestones. Remember that a milestone is a point in the project that marks the completion of one or more deliverables. A good project scope statement should also specify the technical requirements as well as the limits or exclusions, and as we mentioned earlier, it should set the boundaries. But above all, the project scope statement, because it is defining the work that has to be accomplished, needs to be reviewed and approved by the customer. One of the major problems that occur in most projects is that the scope of the project tends to creep. That means that we begin to add things, whether because of changes in the external environment or because of customer requests or because the team itself decides to add elements to the project. So that is why we sometimes start with a simple plan and all of a sudden we end up with something much more complex. And with this complexity come additional requirements in terms of budget, in terms of resource expenditure, in terms of schedule delays. And this type of scope creep, while common to many projects, is particularly dangerous for those projects that don't have a very clear, definite outcome. That happens often when we are creating web design pages or when we are creating software updates where the final deliverable is discovered throughout the way. Now, for this particular type of projects, we would use different types of project management methodologies as we will be exploring later. In order to help us better understand all the work that is involved in a project, especially for large complex projects, is a WBS or a work breakdown structure. As the name suggests, a WBS will break down all of the work elements involved in the project down to the lowest possible level. So we start at the top level with the project itself, and we define the relationship of the final deliverable, which is the project, with the different sub-deliverables down to the lowest level, which we call a work package. A work package will help us understand the actual work that has to be done. In other words, the actual task. So not just the deliverable itself, but break it down to the lowest possible level. By doing so, we will identify the time that we would need to complete a specific task, and because we have a better understanding of how long it will take and the specific requirements of the activity, we can then begin to allocate the specific cost for the completion of that task. So we would end up knowing how much would each work package cost, and if we know how long it will take, how much it would cost, we can then start thinking of who is going to do it. Now, this is something that we will be looking at in more detail later when we look at scheduling and resource allocation. But overall, breaking down a project down to its lowest level or a work package will be the basis for scheduling and budgeting. Here we can see an example of a simple work breakdown structure. At the top level, we've got the project, right, which is a personal computer prototype. Now that particular computer prototype will have several key deliverables, including software applications, hardware, storage units. Now, one of those storage units here, it will be the hard drive, and we can bring it down or keep on breaking down that deliverable down to the lowest manageable sub-deliverables into the work work packages. So here we see that the work package for the motor is one of them, that the circuit board has 7 work packages, the chassis frame has 3 work packages, and the read and write head has 5 work packages. Together, the motor, the circuit board, the chassis frame, and then the read and write head will make up the hard drive. So what we see is that in a work breakdown structure, every level is a summary of the levels beneath it. So all of these will make up this one right here, and so on until we get to the final project. Now we can integrate a WBS with the organization breakdown structure, and this is what we see here. So we can have a better understanding of the actual work that is involved and which department or which part of the organization would be in charge of doing it. So by looking at this specific scenario right here, could you figure out what part of the hard drive will be outsourced? At a simple glance, this information is not very evident, but when we begin to look at the different organizational departments, that the manufacturing is divided into this design team and production, but we also have a testing team, a purchasing team, and a software team. Now, the question was which part of the hard drive, so which part of whether the motor, the circuit board, or the read and write head, which one of this was outsourced. And what we see here is that there is a cost account associated to the purchasing department, and that is related to the motor. Right, so we can begin to see that a specific part of the organization will be in charge of delivering a specific component for the project. Now we can use this information, and after breaking it down to the lowest possible level, which are the work packages, we can use that information to create simple budgets. In this case, we have a direct labor budget that is sorted by the work breakdown structure, and we see that we have the hard drive, which is the component that we're looking at, that will be made up by the motor, the circuit board, chassis frame, and the read and write head. Now each of these deliverables or lowest manageable sub-deliverables will have a specific work package and a cost account associated to them. So the motor was associated to the purchasing department, as we saw in the previous slide. The circuit board had 4 cost accounts. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? The chassis frame has 1, and the read and write head have 3. Let's just quickly go back to confirm it. There we go. The chassis frame has 1 and the read and write head has 3. Here we see those 3, right? So together the sum of all of the direct labor will amount to $1,660. We can flip it around, and that is the advantage of creating work breakdown structures that are linked to organizational breakdown structures. In this case, we have the same budget, right, the direct labor budget, but it's sorted not by WBS or work breakdown structure, but by the organizational breakdown structure. So we see here how the design team, the production team, the testing team, purchasing, and software team have specific cost accounts associated to, again, the hard drive. And we see that, of course, we would get that same amount as we saw in the previous example. Now, you may be wondering, when we had this first look, you might wonder, what do these different numbers mean? What do these different numbers mean? Now, those numbers are the WBS code. So that code refers to the level, and it works the same way as the, let's say, table of contents on a book would work. So we have level 1, which is a project, is 1.0. Here we have assigned that the disk and storage unit is 1.1, and then all of the items beneath it follow the same numerical logic. That way, when we have a look at our WBS code, we get something that looks like this. So we've got the computer project, right? That would be level 1, and then the storage unit 1.1, then the hard drive and the motor, and then all of those different components down to the different work packages. Now, do not confuse the WBS coding with the ID. Now, this ID is an sequential numeric numbering that starts with 1 and goes all the way depending on how many different levels and activities we have. But we will be using these ID later on when we begin to use software to create a schedule and to create Gantt charts, and we will be using this ID to set the predecessors. But that's something that we will be looking at a later session.